It's solely for tax reasons, Tom insisted, his voice softening slightly as he saw my reluctance. You're always emphasizing financial prudence, and this is the most advantageous course of action for our family. He reached across the kitchen counter and took my hand, but his touch felt unfamiliar. Perhaps it was the way his fingers didn't fully enclose mine as they once did, or perhaps it was the subtle tremor I detected in his voice. I stood there in our kitchen, gazing at the documents he'd just slid across the granite countertop, my heart pounding. The house transfer papers seemed to taunt me, their official letterhead stark against the white surface. The twins were finally asleep upstairs after a long day, and here I was, facing what felt like an ultimatum from my husband of 4 years. My name is Caitlin Wilson. I'm 38 years old and a physician at Houston Methodist Hospital. I purchased this beautiful Victorian house in the Heights neighborhood 2 years before meeting Tom, using savings accumulated during my residency and meticulous financial planning. Now, standing in my dream kitchen, which I'd personally renovated, I was being pressured to relinquish my most significant investment. If you truly cared about our marriage, you'd comprehend why this is necessary, Tom said, pushing the papers closer. Between your demanding hospital schedule and constant fatigue, I'm the one holding this family together. His words stung, yet a certain nuance in his tone gave me pause. There was a sharpness I hadn't noticed before. I glanced at the baby monitor on the counter, observing our twins, Emma and Ethan, sleeping soundly in their cribs. At 2 years old, they were my miniature replicas, sharing my dark curls and olive skin. They were also the reason I worked double shifts at the hospital, determined to provide them with every possible advantage. Tom never seemed to grasp that my dedication to my career wasn't driven by ambition, but by a desire to secure our children's future. I'm not sure, Tom, I said, withdrawing my hand. This house, it's my safety net. I acquired it before we were married. As the words escaped my lips, I saw a fleeting expression cross his face. Was it anger? Frustration? Whatever it was, it vanished swiftly, replaced by what appeared to be rehearsed concern. That night, as I lay awake in bed, his words resonated in my mind, but something else echoed as well, a faint, persistent voice of caution I couldn't quite ignore. The following morning, as I prepared for my hospital shift, something about Tom's demeanor bothered me. He'd been distant lately, spending extended hours at his marketing firm, perpetually glued to his phone. I'd dismissed it as work-related stress, but now, coupled with this sudden urgency regarding the house, my medical intuition was raising red flags. I dropped your jacket off at the dry cleaners, Tom announced as I hurried around the kitchen, packing the twins' daycare bags while hastily eating a piece of toast. You can express your gratitude later. His smile seemed strained, and he barely glanced up from his phone. Just 6 months prior, he would have been assisting me with the twins' bags, ensuring I had a proper breakfast before my shift. I observed him as I secured Emma and Ethan in their car seats. There was a newfound pep in his step, and he'd resumed going to the gym. Subtle changes that seemed insignificant individually, but collectively painted a worrisome picture. At work, between patients, I contacted my friend Nina, a real estate lawyer. Something feels wrong, I confided, slipping into an empty examination room. He's insistent on this transfer, claiming it's for tax purposes. Tax purposes? Nina interrupted. Caitlin, transferring the house solely to his name wouldn't provide any tax advantages. If anything, it would complicate matters since you purchased it pre-marriage. My blood ran cold. Preoccupied with work and the twins, I hadn't conducted my due diligence. Tom had relied on that, hadn't he? Listen carefully, Nina continued, her voice serious. Don't sign anything. I don't want to alarm you, but I've encountered this before. Men don't typically press for property transfers unless they're planning something. That afternoon, during a short break, I did something I'd never done before. I reviewed our phone records. Tom had been making frequent calls to the same number for months. My hands trembled as I performed a reverse lookup. A name appeared, Destiny Martinez. A quick social media search revealed a beautiful woman in her mid-20s whose check-ins coincided with Tom's late nights at work. My stomach churned as I scrolled through her photos, pausing at one from 2 weeks ago. She was at a real estate office, the caption reading, "Big changes coming. New chapter. Blessed." I closed my office door and sat in silence, my mind racing. Years of medical training had taught me to trust my instincts. Now, those same instincts were urging me to protect myself and my children. That evening, I left work early for the first time in months. Instead of retrieving the twins from daycare, I drove directly to a discreet electronics store Nina had recommended. The elderly man behind the counter barely reacted when I explained my need. A high-quality recording device, small enough to conceal in my kitchen. "Protect yourself," he said quietly. As he demonstrated the device's operation, the shopkeeper remarked, "The most compelling evidence is always in their own words." I arrived home before Tom, setting up the recorder and starting dinner as if it were an ordinary evening. When he entered, he seemed surprised to find me there. "No emergencies at the hospital today?" he inquired, his tone casual but his eyes sharp. "I thought we could discuss the house transfer further," I said, stirring the pasta sauce. "I've been considering what you said." I watched his reflection in the kitchen window as his face illuminated with poorly disguised triumph. "I knew you'd see reason," he said, approaching me from behind. "You're making the right decision, Kate. This is what's best for our family." The way he emphasized family made my skin crawl. Throughout dinner, I let him talk, recording every word as he detailed his elaborate scheme of how the transfer would supposedly benefit us. Each lie was carefully crafted, calculated, and I realized with sickening clarity that he'd been orchestrating this for months. After putting the twins to bed, I sat in their dimly lit nursery, watching them sleep. Emma clutched her favorite stuffed giraffe, while Ethan, as usual, had kicked off his blanket. Gazing at their peaceful faces, I felt a surge of protective fury. Whatever game Tom was playing, he hadn't accounted for a mother's instinct to safeguard her children. The next few days were a flurry of meticulous preparation. Following Nina's advice, I copied all our financial records, obtained new credit cards solely in my name, and began transferring my share of our savings into a separate account. Each night, I lay awake beside Tom, listening to his steady breathing and wondering when exactly my husband had transformed into a stranger. A week later, Tom presented the final transfer documents, already bearing his signature. "Just your signature," he said, sliding them across the counter, the same spot where this ordeal had begun. "Then we can put this all behind us." I picked up the pen, my hand surprisingly steady despite the adrenaline coursing through my veins. Tom watched intently as I poised the pen above the signature line. In that moment, I saw everything with crystal clarity. His impatience, his barely suppressed excitement, the way he kept glancing at his phone as if anticipating a message. "Actually," I said, setting the pen down, "I think we need to discuss destiny first." The color drained from his face so rapidly I almost laughed. But this wasn't humorous. This was the commencement of a battle, and I was armed with evidence, resolve, and a mother's wrath. "What are you talking about?" Tom stammered, his carefully constructed composure crumbling as he instinctively reached for his phone. "Who is Destiny?" I retrieved my own phone, displaying the screenshots I'd meticulously gathered. "Destiny Martinez, 26 years old, works at your firm. You've been having lunch with her at Lorenzo's 3 times a week for the past 4 months. The same restaurant where you proposed to me, by the way. Nice touch." Tom's expression morphed from shock to anger. "You've been spying on me." "Protecting myself," I corrected, maintaining a steady voice despite my racing heart. "Just like you've been protecting our tax situation with this house transfer, right?" He slumped onto a kitchen stool, running his hands through his hair, a nervous tick I'd once found endearing. "It's not what you think. Really. Things between us haven't been right for a long time. You're always at the hospital. The twins barely know you." "Don't you dare!" I cut him off, my voice low but sharp. "Don't you dare use our children to justify this. I work to provide them with a future. What's your excuse for jeopardizing their present?" He stood abruptly, his face reddening with anger. "You think you're so clever, don't you? The brilliant doctor, always one step ahead. But you have no idea what it's like living in your shadow, being the guy who married up. Destiny appreciates me. She understands." "She understands that you're attempting to steal my house," I interrupted. "The house I purchased before I met you. The house where our children took their first steps. Our lawyer said..." Your lawyer, I corrected. The one you've been meeting with behind my back. Nina warned me about him. He has quite a reputation for helping husbands conceal assets during divorces. Tom paled. You talked to Nina? I've spoken to numerous people, Tom. I may be busy with work, but I'm not stupid. I produced another stack of papers, bank statements, phone records, recovered emails. Did you honestly believe I wouldn't uncover this? That I'd simply sign away my children's home because you feigned affection and mentioned taxes? The baby monitor crackled again, this time with Ethan's cries joining his sister's. Tom moved toward the stairs, but I blocked his path. Don't bother, I said coldly. I'll attend to our children. You can occupy yourself explaining to Destiny why her new chapter will have a different setting than she anticipated. As I ascended the stairs to comfort our twins, I heard Tom's phone ping, probably Destiny wondering why her knight in shining armor was running late for their rendezvous. Let her wonder. I had more pressing matters to address, like shielding my children's future from the man who was supposed to help me build it. This isn't over, Tom yelled after me as I reached the top of the stairs. You're making a grave mistake. I paused, looking down at him from the landing. No, Tom. The grave mistake was assuming I wouldn't protect what's mine. I turned away from his reddening face and went to the nursery where Emma and Ethan needed me. The next morning, I awoke to find Tom gone, likely having spent the night at Destiny's. As I prepared the twins for daycare, my phone buzzed with a text from Nina. He's consulted his lawyer. Time to act swiftly. I was already prepared. During my lunch break, I met with James Cooper, the divorce attorney Nina had recommended. His office was warm and inviting, unlike the stark corporate settings I'd envisioned. Dr. Wilson, he began, reviewing the evidence I'd compiled. I must say, I'm impressed. Most clients come to me after the fact. You've provided us with everything necessary to gain the upper hand. I have good instincts, I replied, watching him examine the recordings. Better than good, he smiled. These recordings are irrefutable proof of intent to defraud. And the paper trail of his meetings with the other attorney, well, let's just say judges frown upon premeditated asset concealment. As we discussed strategy, my phone lit up with messages from Tom. We need to talk. You're being unreasonable. Think about the twins. Each message grew increasingly desperate. He's realizing his plan is unraveling, James observed. Be prepared. This is often when they resort to unpleasant tactics. He was correct. That evening, when Tom finally returned, his nice guy facade had completely disintegrated. You think you're so smart, he sneered, storming into the kitchen where I was feeding the twins. But you've just ruined everything. Destiny and I could have been reasonable about this. Let you stay in the guest house. Kept things civil for the kids. I couldn't help but laugh, which only fueled his rage. The guest house? In my own home? Our home, he shouted, startling Emma in her high chair. I've lived here for 4 years. Dada mad? Ethan asked, his little face creased with worry. Daddy's just tired, I soothed, giving Tom a warning glance. And he's leaving for a while. Like hell I am, Tom growled, but his voice was quieter now, aware of the twins watching. Actually, you are, I said calmly, retrieving another document from my bag. This is a temporary restraining order. My attorney filed it this morning after you threatened me via text. You have 1 hour to pack your belongings. You can't do this, he whispered, his face ashen. I already did. And Tom, I met his gaze steadily. Destiny is welcome to you. But this house, the one you tried to steal from your children, that's mine. And if you think I won't fight you with everything I have, you clearly never knew me at all. He stood there, mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water as the reality of his situation finally sunk in. The unraveling of his perfect plan was etched on his face. An hour later, I watched from the nursery window as Tom loaded his bags into his car. He kept glancing back at the house as if still unable to comprehend how his scheme had backfired so spectacularly. The twins played quietly with their blocks behind me, blissfully oblivious to their father's departure. Bye-bye? Emma inquired, noticing me at the window. Yes, sweetheart. Daddy's going bye-bye for a while. I hugged her close, inhaling the scent of her baby shampoo, letting it ground me. The following weeks were a whirlwind of legal proceedings and hospital shifts. Tom launched a full-scale assault through his lawyer, demanding half of everything, including the house. But James was ready for him. "Did you see his face when we presented the recordings in court?" James asked during one of our meetings. "He thought he was so clever, but he never considered you might be smarter." The evidence was overwhelming. Not only had we demonstrated his intent to defraud me of my premarital asset, but we'd also uncovered something even more troubling. Tom had been embezzling from his marketing firm to finance his extravagant dates with Destiny. "Our forensic accountant found everything," James explained, spreading bank statements across his desk. "He's been cooking the books for months, probably to maintain the lifestyle he promised Destiny." The irony wasn't lost on me. All those times Tom had complained about living in my shadow, about feeling inferior to my success, he'd been orchestrating his own downfall. When Tom's firm discovered the embezzlement, they pressed charges. Destiny, it turned out, had no interest in a boyfriend facing criminal prosecution. She dumped him via text. I know because he showed up at the house one night, drunk, waving his phone and begging. "You did this to me," he yelled from the front yard, forcing me to call the police. "You've ruined everything." As the officers escorted him away, I felt a peculiar blend of pity and relief. The man I'd married, the father of my children, had become someone unrecognizable. Or perhaps he'd always been this person, and I'd been too preoccupied to notice. The divorce was finalized sooner than anticipated. Facing legal issues with his firm, Tom couldn't finance a protracted court battle. He relinquished any claim to the house in return for more favorable custody arrangements, supervised visits twice a week. "You've handled this remarkably well," Nina commented over coffee weeks later, after everything had settled. Most people would have crumbled. I watched Emma and Ethan playing in my backyard, my house, my victory. I had to remain strong for them, I said. And honestly, Tom underestimating me was his biggest blunder. "And Destiny?" Nina inquired. "Any idea what became of her?" I smiled, recalling the latest gossip. "Apparently she's dating her real estate agent now, the one who was supposed to help her move into my house." We both laughed at the irony. Later that night, as I tucked the twins into bed, Ethan asked, "Mama sad?" "No, baby," I said, kissing his forehead. "Mama's not sad at all." And for the first time in months, I genuinely meant it. The aftermath of my divorce from Tom brought unexpected benefits. The greatest surprise wasn't that I could manage everything independently. I'd always been capable of that. But discovering how much simpler life became without the constant burden of Tom's deceit. My career thrived without Tom's subtle sabotage and passive-aggressive remarks about my hours. I rediscovered a passion for my work and was promoted to Chief of Emergency Medicine, something Tom had always declared impossible while raising twins. The twins adapted better than I'd feared. Initially, I worried about how they'd cope with the changes, but children possess remarkable resilience. Their supervised visits with Tom became less frequent as his legal woes mounted. He eventually accepted a plea bargain for the embezzlement charges and relocated to Dallas after serving his sentence. I heard through mutual acquaintances that Destiny had moved on to another wealthy target. Sometimes I wondered if she ever realized how close she'd come to being ensnared in Tom's web of lies. In a way, she'd dodged a bullet, though I doubt she perceived it as such. My house, the one Tom had fought so hard to seize, became a true sanctuary. I renovated the twins' rooms, planted a garden, and created the home I'd always envisioned. Every mortgage payment felt like a triumph, a reminder of how I'd protected what was mine. Nina teased me about dating again, but I was content concentrating on my children and my career. There would be time for romance later. For now, I was savoring the peace that came with knowing I'd not only survived Tom's betrayal, but emerged stronger. One tranquil evening, as I sat on my porch watching Emma and Ethan play in our front yard, I reflected on how much life had changed. The twins were racing around, their laughter echoing through the neighborhood, the same yard where Tom had stood that night, drunk and raging about how I'd ruined his life. I'd recently learned through the hospital grapevine that Tom and Destiny had briefly reconnected in Dallas, only to separate again when she discovered he was still on probation and employed as a junior copywriter at a small agency. His fall from grace had been dramatic, from marketing executive to convicted felon, from family man to cautionary tale. The irony wasn't lost on me that his desperate attempt to acquire my house had cost him everything: his career, his freedom, and most importantly, his relationship with his children. The twins now barely remembered their daily life with him. He'd become the dad they saw occasionally on weekends, always trying too hard with extravagant gifts and forced enthusiasm. "Mama, look!" Emma called out proudly, demonstrating a cartwheel while Ethan applauded. These were the moments that mattered. Not the house, not the victory over Tom's schemes, but the simple joy of watching my children flourish. A few days prior, I'd received a letter from Tom filled with apologies and regrets. I filed it away without responding. Some bridges, once burned, shouldn't be rebuilt. Instead, I concentrated on constructing new ones, strengthening my bonds with my children, my career, and most importantly, my self-respect.